Hello guys and welcome to a new episode of Sound Design Monday. I'm your host Sandworld, and today we're going to be creating the Dannic lead. Today we're going to be creating the breakdown lead, and next week we're going to be creating the drop lead that he's pretty much obviously well known for, and uses it in a groovy way. And it's really a simple lead, it's not that complicated. But today we're going to be looking at that breakdown big roomish lead that is usually played in breakdowns, and it plays what I like to call a transriff. And pretty much what transriff is it's pretty much a melody made out of chords, and the top note changes as the notes are being played. Okay, so that's going to be the terminology for today. This is how the Dannic lead is going to sound like. Okay, and I'm going to be giving you guys a few tips on how to layer this so you get the exact sound, and we're going to talk a little bit about everything it takes to create this type of sound, so make sure to stick around. And next, we're going to be creating a hardstyle lead that's going to sound like this. Sorry, wrong sound. Okay, so we're going to be learning how to create this hardstyle lead after the Dannic tutorial. Okay, so first we're going to get into the Dannic tutorial, and the Dannic sound is going to be pretty much another supersaw. And I've been creating supersaws for my tutorials since God knows day one, and there's so many ways you can make supersaws. So today we're going to be looking at the Dannic breakdown lead, and it's going to be a big roomish type of breakdown lead, okay? Okay, so for the part A, we're going to have a saw wave with 8 voices, retrig on, and down an octave. So while you put that, the retrig is pretty much going to make sure that the face starts over, and generally the effect that's going to give is that it's going to make the sound more in your face. So this oscillator is going to be more in the center, and it's going to sound mono. We're going to be lowering this down by an octave. Pretty much what that is if we're playing this note, it's going to be playing this note instead. So that's down an octave. And pretty much the key to the sound is going to be pretty much the saws being detuned. Okay, so here we're going to have an octave down, and usually you leave the retrig on whenever you're creating lower type of frequency sounds, generally like pretty much saying a bass. Okay, so this is going to be the lower part of the frequency of this sound. We're not going to pan it. We're going to put the volume at 1.14, no detunement for this one. Stereo at 10. Our attack in our amp envelope bass is going to be set all the way down. Our decay to 5.29, our sustain at 4.25, and our release at 4.24. The reason the sustain is down is because what happens is the more voices you use, the louder it's gonna get. And pretty much every voice, the voice number, all it's doing is creating unison. And another way of putting this is that for every note I play, this oscillator is gonna be playing 8 noises, this oscillator is gonna be playing 8 voices, this oscillator is gonna be playing 4, and this one 1. So if you add it, 8 plus 8 plus 4 plus 1 is 21. So for every one note I play, so let's say I play a G, it's gonna be playing 21 voices. If I were to play 2 notes, multiply that by 2, and that's how many voices are going to come out. And generally speaking, it's going to be saws and the white noise coming out. One more thing to do is put the polyphony up to 6 here, and the reason for putting the polyphony up is because it's going to allow you to play more voices, which you will see in the voices tab. The higher the polyphony, the more voices you're going to be able to play. And pretty much it's important because if you play, let's say 3 notes with the supersaw and you have your polyphony down at 3, you're going to lose some of those notes. So generally you want your polyphony up for that same reason. Okay, so once we have that, let's go into filter A, where we're going to be putting a low pass cutoff set to 12, no resonance, drive set to 10 at 3.43, and it's a 24 dB type low pass filter. Filter control is going to be set to 4 o'clock or 21, 340, 1.28 hertz. Resonance all the way down. Key track is going to be set to 2.05. And generally what the key track does is the higher the key track, the more the filter is going to open when you play a note. So if I had to cut off all the way down and I put the key track all the way up, then the filter is going to be open and it's going to close back down. Okay, so once we have this, now we're going to go into part B, where we're going to be putting a noise for our first oscillator in part B, oscillator A1. Part B is going to be the dark side, or the different color. And white noise is going to be set to 1 voice, lower the volume to 0.90, because you can hear higher frequencies at lower volumes a lot better than lower ones. I always say that in my videos. Retrig on. No panning. Stereo set to default, no detunement, no phase. So it's going to be set to default by like that. Next thing we're going to do is go into amp envelope B, where our attack is going to be set to 0.05. Just lower that down all the way to 0. Decay is going to be set to 4.71, sustain at 4.37, and our release at 2.51. oscillator B1, we're going to be putting a saw with 4 voices, detuning at 5.19, which is really high, and this is the key to the sound. Our voice is set to 9.95, our stereo to 10, and no panning, retrig off, and no phase. Next, we go into filter B, where we're going to be putting the input select of B. So this is going to be a tone filter with a low pass filter, drive set to 8.43, cutoff at 12, no resonance, and 24 dB type filter. Okay, so I've always stressed enough that if you don't know what ADSR is, then go find out what it is or look at some of my tutorials. Transdesign episode 2, I go into what ADSR is visually. So you really need to know because it's a really important part of sound design. ADSR is just a type saying attack, decay, sustain, and release. And generally it's going to be routed to your amp, and almost every synthesizer you use is going to use ADSR no matter what, even if it's like some crazy ass synth. And generally it's important because you can modify a lot of things using envelopes, and envelopes pretty much is using the ADSR and the attack, decay, sustain, release. And if you know what those mean and how it's going to affect, let's say, turning a knob or how the sound's going to come out, it's really important. And ADSR is pretty much the basis of synthesis, in my opinion, next to, you know, oscillator detunement, phasing, FM, and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so we go into mod envelope A, where we have our attack set to 0, our decay set to 3.51, our sustain set to 0.69, and our release set to 4.02. We're going to turn the black knob all the way up, and we're going to route this to cutoff AB. So pretty much what's going to happen is this is going to be a value of 10. So this cutoff knob is, let's say, going to go all the way up to 10. And pretty much all that's going to do is it's going to go through the ADSR method. So since attack is all the way down, this is going to be turned instantly as soon as you play a note. It's going to go down in decay. So decay is going to decide how fast it goes down to the sustain, which is set to, let's say, 0.69. So let's just say here. And then our release is going to decide how fast it goes back down to here. So it's going to give it more of a tail. You know, it's going to make it last a little bit longer to go back. And generally this happens really, really fast. Okay. Last final thing to do is go into our EQ section, where we have a 2-pole type filter, EQ base set to 7.64 dB, our EQ base frequency to 49.81 Hertz, EQ treble 9.14, and our EQ treble frequency is going to be set to 1 o'clock or 5661.91 Hertz. And generally speaking, it's finally down to polish the sound with the reverb. It's going to be set to 50. Pre-delay is set to 0, so no pre-delay. Reverb dampness at 0.62, and what reverb dampness does, it pretty much makes the reverb sound a lot more in the lower frequency. So generally a reverb is going to be high in the higher frequencies, but the more dampness you put, the lower it's going to go. So generally speaking, having a damp high is not such a good idea if you have a lot of mids playing around the same time this lead is going to be playing. Next, we go into reverb size, which is going to decide how big the room, the sound is going to be in the emulation of it. So the higher the size, the bigger the reverb. Reverb width is going to decide like how wide it's going to be. So usually you hear reverb towards the sides of your stereo field, or towards the sides of your speakers or your headphones. If you put this down, it's going to be more in the center, and not such a good idea. Generally, you want your reverb to be wide. So that's the reason we have it up almost all the time. So once we have that, last thing to do is put the mix A up to 6.09, mix B up to 7.18, and our master to 5.63. And generally speaking, once you have that, then you should be getting the Dannic. Last final thing to do is I'm going to be talking about Nexus. Nexus is a great tool to layer sounds, but I don't feel like it's a great tool to get your sounds from, just for the reason that it's all been used. Everyone has access to it, and generally speaking, these sounds can be modified, but generally they're not. You generally don't feel like it because they sound so amazing as they are. And pretty much Nexus has so many supersaws, it's crazy. So generally speaking, whenever you're gonna layer sounds, it's good to use Nexus. Nexus is used by almost every fucking professional producer I know, and it's a great tool, but for me, I only use it to layer. Generally speaking, if you see what it's gonna do is we're gonna be playing this at the same time, so let's lower the volumes a bit. So we're gonna put the Nexus high by an octave. So I'm just gonna be turning it off and on so you can see the difference it makes. So as you can see, Nexus gives it more life, and generally speaking, Nexus is a great tool to layer, and it's one of those tips I'm going to give you guys is that if you have a sound and it sounds really, really, let's just say plain, layering it with Nexus is not such a bad idea. And generally speaking, Silent One has its own sound, so just layering it with another synth is another great idea. So generally speaking, that's going to be the Dannic tutorial. Hopefully you guys learned. If you're going to check the Hardstyle tutorial out, then make sure to check it out. We're going to talk a little bit more about what it takes to make a Hardstyle lead and a little bit of the detuning. But generally speaking, if this is it for you, then to make sure to like my page at facebook.com/SenWorldMusic. I put all the presets of all my tutorials up on there, and I also release a lot of Soundbanks for free, so you don't have to buy them. And yeah, that's it. Make sure to subscribe as well, and let's get to the Hardstyle lead. Okay, so here we're gonna be creating a Hardstyle lead. And pretty much the first thing I have to say is that a Hardstyle lead, the key to Hardstyle leads, it's in the detunement. And generally speaking, Hardstyle leads tend to be a lot dirty and so forth. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna be creating this basic Hardstyle lead. I received a lot of songs through messages and comments through Facebook. And generally speaking, they all had this layer of sounds. So this is what we're gonna be creating, and then I'm gonna show you guys how to layer them to get the effect for those songs you guys sent in. Okay, so pretty much speaking, it's going to be another supersaw set to polyphony of 3. The reason it's not higher is because the more notes you play, since we're detuning them by a lot, what's going to happen is if you play more than, let's say, 2 or 3 notes after that, you're not going to be able to hear the harmonics or the melodics of the sound because of the detunement. So it's not a good idea. So we're going to leave the polyphony at 3. Okay, so first thing is we're going to go into part A. We're going to put a saw wave, 8 voices, retrig off, volume all the way up, detunement to 4.95, stereo at 10, and no panning. Okay, so generally speaking, the key to creating these sounds is through the detunement. It's just pretty much the difference between the big room house lead and a Hardstyle lead is just in that, the detunement. Hardstyle leads tend to have it a little bit more higher. Okay, so now we go into the amp envelope, attack all the way down, decay all the way down, release all the way down, and sustain down to 5. Like I stated before in the Dannic lead tutorial, the more voices you have, the louder the sound's gonna get. So we compensate for that by decreasing the sustain down, which in terms is gonna decide how loud it gets, and the sustain is just gonna be down, so the sound isn't gonna be at its full capacity. So filter A, we're not gonna be putting a filter. Next, we go into part B with a saw wave, 8 voices, detunement to 6.881. Now it's getting really high. Stereo at 10, volume all the way up, and no panning. Envelope B is going to be the sustain all the way up, attack at 0, decay at 0, and release at 0. Retrig off for oscillator A1. Oscillator B1, turn the retrig off as well. Saw wave with 8 voices, detunement at straight at 12 o'clock at 5.29. No phase, stereo at 10, and pan at 0.10. Okay, so no filter for this as well. Next, we're going to go into the filter control where the cutoff is going to be set to 51.44 hertz, no resonance, no key track, and put the warm drive on. So cutoff is set to like around 10 or 11 o'clock. Once we have that, we're almost done with the sound. We're going to go into the chorus, which is another very important part. Chorus is going to be set all the way up with the chorus delay at 7.65 milliseconds, chorus rate at 0.01 hertz, chorus depth at 0. Chorus feedback at 0, and the width of the chorus set to 100. EQ, we're gonna have a 1-pole EQ. Sorry, a 2-pole EQ. 1 pole, sorry, should be 1 pole. EQ bass at 720.29 dB. Bass frequency at 102.65, set by like that by default. EQ treble, again by default, just leave it 7.15 dB. And we're gonna turn down the EQ treble frequency down to 897.60 hertz. Next, we go into the reverb to polish the sound and finish the sound. Dry and wet at 40. Pre-delay at 150.48 milliseconds. The dampness at 2.71. The size 6.29. And the width all the way up at 100. So once we have that, we should be getting the Hardstyle sound. Which, let me click. Okay. So once we have that, and I'm going to show you guys another tip. Next thing you can do is, let's say, put a Nexus. And generally speaking, a lot of Hardstyle leads, they have this as a layer of sound. But what they do is on top, they put a square wave. And a square wave, it can be all types of square waves. So right now we're going to get like a square wave, if we can find one. Just look for a sound that talks about square. So square terror sounds good. Put the cutoff off. Cool. Now we're we're gonna be playing it together. So pretty cool. What the square gives it is more of a sustained kind of sound, and it kind of makes it slide, which is the key to that. So finding the right square is the key to getting that sound that a lot of you guys sent me. So let's see if we can get one. So pretty cool. So just make sure you layer this sound with a type of squarish lead. You can find a lot of square leads on my Facebook page at facebook.com/soundworldmusic. Honestly, my recommendation would be to get the W&W breakdown lead that I have on there, and it'll work great with this sound. Anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Hopefully, it wasn't that long, and I'll see you guys next week.